The wagon almost went over before Rowan ever saw the cabin. One wheel slid toward the drop, the mare screamed, and the trace snapped hard enough to whip across her knuckles. Ada caught the loose leather with both hands, wrapped it once around the brake post, and leaned back with all her weight until the wagon shuddered to a stop. Her palms burned. Her breath smoked white in the mountain air. Ahead, through the pines, sat a dark cabin under a steep roof, smoke lifting from the chimney and a pair of child stockings pinned to the porch rail to dry. A tall man stood in the shadow by the door with one hand bandaged clean in white cloth, and a little girl peered out from behind his leg holding a wooden spoon like it was something holy. Then Ada's stepmother straightened her fur collar and said, in the same voice she used to ask for more coffee, "You can get down now. If you're listening tonight with dishes in the sink, yarn in your lap, or the last of the daylight fading at your window, tell me where you're hearing this from, because the story begins high above Bitter Run where the road thins, the weather turns quick, and mercy looks nothing like folks expect it to." Ada climbed down slowly, her boots sinking into crusted snow. She was 19, hungry, tired, and still wearing the brown coat she had turned inside out 3 nights earlier to mend the lining by lamplight. The cold smelled of spruce bark and creek ice. The man on the porch watched her with a stillness that was harder to read than anger. Her stepmother held out a folded paper. "The preacher signed before noon. Mr. Calder signed yesterday. I signed as witness. All that's left is for the girl to cross the threshold." Ada stared at the paper, then at the man. "You told me we were bringing flour. And now," Hester said, "you know better." The little girl shrank back behind the man's coat, but he did not move. "You told me," he said to Hester. She understood the arrangement. His voice was rough from disuse, not cruelty. Hester smiled thinly. "She understands enough. Her father died owing money. I've kept her fed. And you needed help before winter deepened. This settles matters fairly for everyone." Ada almost laughed at that. Her father had taught her sums by candlelight, using feed tallies and freight notes, and Hester's numbers never once came out honest. "My father didn't owe enough to trade me for it," Ada said. The man's jaw tightened. "How much?" Hester named a figure too fast and too high. Ada saw the lie hit him. He looked from Hester to the trunk in the wagon bed, then to Ada's face. "If you climb back onto that seat," he asked her quietly, "what waits for you there?" Hester answered before she could. "Work, board, a chance to pay what's due." Ada knew what that meant. Pre-dawn kitchen fires, men in the boarding house hall after drink, wages that disappeared into Hester's apron pocket before they ever touched her hand. The man asked again, this time only to Ada. "And if you come through my door?" Ada swallowed. "I don't know." He nodded once. "That makes 2 of us." His name was Levi Calder, and Ada had heard it in town spoken the way folks speak of whether they respect but do not visit. Widower, lives above the ridge, comes down with trout, pelts, and timber receipts. Leaves before talk finds him. He did not look wild. He looked worn. His coat had been mended at the cuff by an impatient hand. His beard cut short with a knife rather than vanity, and sorrow sat on him not like drama but like old weight carried so long the body forgets any other posture. The child behind him, small and solemn, had one braid coming loose and a cardigan too big at the sleeves. Levi glanced at the paper in Hester's glove with something close to distaste. "I agreed to a lawful arrangement because I was told the girl wanted out of town and a roof where the work was honest. I broke my hand under a spruce log in October. I've got stock to carry through snow, a 7-year-old who needs more than I can give alone, and no kin near enough to help. That was the shape of the matter as it was told to me." Hester snapped. "And this is the shape of it now." The child tugged his sleeve. "Pa, the bread." The single syllable landed strangely in Ada's chest. Levi turned his head. "Take it off the hook, Ruthie. Use the rag." The girl vanished inside. Ada watched her go and wondered when a doorway had last led somewhere safe enough for a child not to hesitate. Then Hester thrust the paper against Ada's coat. "Choose." The mountain wind hissed through the pines. The wagon wheel clicked as the mare stamped once in impatience. Ada thought of returning to the boarding house room whose latch never held right, to a life where every kindness had a hand hidden under it. She looked at the stockings on the porch rail, at the bucket of water skimmed with ice, at the man who had not reached for her once. Then she lifted the trunk herself, carried it up the steps with both arms shaking, and set it down beside the door. Hester let out one satisfied breath. "Good," she said. "I left her church dress in the trunk." Ada turned back one last time. "Did you leave my mother's meadow deed where it was?" For the first time that day, Hester's face changed. "Mind the life in front of you," she said. "The dead won't feed you." Then she snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled back down the mountain, taking the last easy road with it. Inside, the cabin smelled of yeast, smoke, and wool drying too close to heat. There were only 2 downstairs rooms and a loft above, but everything was orderly. Boots lined beneath a bench, with stacked bark out, flour crock sealed tight, copper pan polished bright. A folded cradle stood by the wall under a quilt, empty now. Ada saw it and saw Levi notice her seeing it. Ruth stood by the table with the loaf she had rescued from burning, watching Ada as a cautious stray watches an open hand. "Can she stay in Mama's room?" the child asked. Levi's shoulders tightened. "That's not Mama's room anymore." Ruth dropped her eyes at once. Ada stepped in before grief could bruise them both. "I can sleep anywhere there's a blanket." Levi set the trunk beside the hearth. "You'll take the small room. Ruth and I used the loft." He hung the marriage paper from a nail without reading it, as if even paper could wait one more hour to do harm. Over supper he told Ada what Hester had not. The county woman had warned him in September that if he could not keep a proper household, Ruth's aunt downstate might petition for the girl. His hand had been broken since October. Snow would soon close the pass. He had thought a contract wife, someone free to leave come spring with wages, might keep the house alive and the county quiet. "No one here lays claim to what you won't give," he said, and because he spoke without softness or pressure, Ada believed he meant it. After Ruth was asleep, Levi finally opened the marriage paper. The lamp flame bent once in a draft. He read, went still, and set the sheet flat on the table between them. Hester had marked it permanent. Not seasonal. Not provisional. Permanent lawful residence with household rights transferred upon crossing the threshold. Hester had not hired Ada out for winter. She had buried her there in ink. Ada stared at the words until they blurred. "Then she's taken everything." Levi looked at her for a long moment, then went to the shelf, took down a small iron key tied to buckskin, and placed it in her palm. "That opens the cash box under your bed. It isn't much, but what's there is counted. If you stay the night, you'll have use of the house and the truth of it. If you want to leave at first light, I'll hitch the mule and take you myself as far as the lower road." Ada curled her fingers around the key so fast it almost hurt. No one had trusted her with a key since her father's fever took him. Levi banked the fire and said, almost to the stove, "Crooked paper doesn't get to decide who belongs in my house." That was the moment Ada understood her life had already broken in two, and everything after would grow from which half she chose to protect. She woke before dawn out of habit and sat bolt upright in the narrow bed, listening to the house breathe around her. Someone had left fresh water in the basin. The towel on the peg was clean. Under the bed sat the cash box. Ada opened it with shaking fingers and found $6 silver, a neat little ledger, and the brass compass her father had carried every day of her childhood. She knew it by the crooked scratch on the back where, at 10 years old, she had tried to carve her initials and nearly ruined his temper and the casing both. Tears came so quickly she resented them. Levi appeared in the doorway a minute later, hat in hand though it was his own house. "I thought you might find that." She asked where it came from. He told her Thomas Rowan had left it with him 3 summers earlier, along with other papers, saying that if the ground ever shifted under Ada's feet, Levi was to hand the compass back. "I should have ridden down with it when your father died," he said. "I didn't. My own house was coming apart by then, and I let grief make me late to yours." Ada wanted to be angry, and some part of her was, but another part, quieter and more dangerous, heard in his words the first plain apology a grown soul had offered her in years. Work made the day simpler. Ada kneaded biscuit dough while Ruth fed wood to the stove and reported with solemn certainty that the mule hated harmonicas and the black hen pecked only strangers. Levi, favoring his bad hand, showed Ada the loose hinge on the goat pen and the leaking seam in the stock shed roof. By noon she had reset the hinge with her awl and a flattened nail, mended the roof with tarred canvas and overlapping stitches stronger than Levi's old patch, and sorted the pantry so even Ruth could find beans in the dark. Levi came out just as she climbed down from the roof ridge with her skirt tied at the knees for balance. "You'll break your neck," he said. "Not before the seam fails," Ada answered. He looked up at the roof, then back at her, something like unwilling admiration crossing his face. Later, while he steadied a ladder and she tightened a leather trace with waxed thread, he said in the half-absent way of a man thinking past the work in his hands, "Some roofs stay up for years on the strength of one good beam nobody ever sees." It was the first line that would stay with Ada long after the weather changed. That afternoon Mrs. Sutter came up from the lower bend with eggs, washing, and opinions enough to fill a second wagon. She was broad-shouldered, red-cheeked, and wore a once-purple ribbon in her hat that had long ago surrendered to the climate. She took one look at Ada in Levi's yard and said, "So Hester did it, then." Levi carried her basket inside. Mrs. Sutter eyed the bandage on his hand, clicked her tongue, and turned to Ada. "If you're leaving, I'll tell you now the stage road is mud by noon and Hester cheats at eggs. If you're staying, I'll tell you the same thing." Ada liked her instantly for the fairness of that. Mrs. Sutter dug in her basket and handed Ada a brass thimble. "Found it in my mending sack. Too small for me. Right for somebody with sense in her fingers." After a while Levi and the widow stepped to the hitch rail and spoke low. Ada caught only pieces. Pritchard, clerk's office, filing window before deep snow. That evening Levi stood a long time looking down the lower road before he said, "We need to go to town Saturday. If Hester touched your mother's deed, she did it with somebody richer standing at her elbow." They left before dawn with Ruth bundled between blankets on the wagon seat and frost silvering every weed along the road. Town looked ordinary enough when they rolled in. Bakery smoke, hitch rails crowded, men talking cattle and weather as if either one ever listened. But heads turned as soon as people saw Ada beside Levi. In the clerk's office Hester was already there, speaking softly to Mr. Mallory with Calhoun Pritchard leaning at the counter beside her. Black coat neat, silver watch chain bright. Pritchard owned the mercantile, half the grazing contracts south of the river, and the sort of confidence money teaches a man before it teaches him mercy. Hester smiled when she saw Ada, though the smile pinched at one side. "Well, look at that." Ada ignored her and asked to inspect the ledger entry for Martha Rowan's Upper Bitter Run meadow. Mallory fetched the book. There, beneath her mother's original claim, lay a newer note. Transfer pending on abandonment review, petitioned by guardian Hester Rowan and witnessed by Calhoun Pritchard. Ada felt the room narrow. She had been on Levi's mountain 2 days and Hester had already started the process of declaring her gone. Levi spoke very quietly. "That deed isn't hers to move." Pritchard smiled. "Then file your objection, Calder. If you can afford the fee." The fee was more than Levi kept in his box and more than Ada had seen in one place since her father died. For one brief, miserable instant, leaving seemed easier. She could have walked out of that office, found a stage, headed west to a cousin she barely knew, and let Hester and Pritchard divide mountain water like men cutting cake. But Ruth slipped her small hand into Ada's glove, and the child's quiet trust steadied something larger than fear. Ada looked at Mallory and said, "Enter the objection. I'll bring the fee by the final day." Hester laughed softly. "With what money?" Ada closed the ledger. "Mine, once I find where you buried it." Outside the office Levi offered to sell the mule. Ada refused at once. "We need the wagon more than we need one quick answer," she said. She looked across the square at the blacksmith awning, at women with torn cuffs and boys with split reins, and a plan came clear as thread pulled through cloth. People pay to have things mended. People pay more to have them made to last. So while Levi traded smoked trout and winter apples, Ada sat under the awning with her awl, wax thread, and shears, mending cuffs, reins, feed sacks, a church glove, a harness strap, anything laid before her. By noon she had earned 43 cents, a basket of potatoes, and 3 promises of more work. Pritchard stopped once to watch her repair a cracked trace. "You'd do better learning when a line's already been drawn," he said. Ada never looked up from the leather. "My father used to say the same men who draw crooked lines are always the first to call them permanent." That night they climbed home under a star-thick sky with the day's coins tied in a handkerchief between them and Ruth asleep against Ada's shoulder. The road was narrow, the air bitter, the wagon creaking slow through dark timber. After a long stretch, Levi said, without looking at her, "You could still leave before the heavy snow. I know folks in Deer Lodge. I could borrow fare from Mrs. Sutter." Ada asked the only question that mattered. "And you?" He told her the truth at last. Pritchard had been buying parcels along Bitter Run for months. If he took Ada's upper meadow, he could choke Levi's spring by summer and push a cut road through the lower aspens. If the spring went, the stock went, and then the place itself. Ada ought to have been angry that her life could be folded so neatly into another person's problem. Instead, she felt something steadier rise in her. For the first time, Levi was speaking to her not as freight or obligation, but as the other soul standing under the same threat. "I'm not leaving," she said. He tightened his hands on the reins and nodded once. Relief changed the line of his mouth, and Ada learned that evening how close relief can stand to fear without ever naming itself. Winter tightened around Bitter Run. Not in one dramatic storm, but in notices, hoofprints, and small acts meant to wear a person thin. Someone cut the latch rope on the goat pen 2 nights after Christmas. A paper appeared nailed to Levi's gatepost announcing review of access rights before thaw under petition made by Calhoun Pritchard. Boot marks showed up near the spring, too broad for Levi's and too fresh for Chance. "He wants me tired," Levi said, studying them. "He wants you angry," Ada answered. She mended through raw fingertips and wrapped them in cloth when they split. Levi trapped less and stayed close to the house. Ruth began bringing Ada treasures from the kingdom of a 7-year-old mind. A blue jay feather, a striped river stone, a button she swore had belonged to her mother's Sunday dress. One evening, while Ada read from Ruth's primer by firelight, the child leaned one small shoulder against her arm and stayed there through 2 whole pages as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Ada kept reading, though tears kept trying to climb her throat. Near New Year's, Mrs. Sutter rode up with mail and gossip enough to matter. Pritchard had hired men to mark a road through the lower aspens come spring, counting on the meadow to revert and connect his route. Hester, meanwhile, was telling town that Ada was settled and had no interest in old property. Ada appended her coin jar onto the table. Levi added his own few dollars. Ruth solemnly contributed 2 buttons and a marble. Mrs. Sutter blinked hard and muttered that the Lord had always been loose with arithmetic. Between them, by counting every cent twice and every hope only once, they had enough for the fee. The Chinook came in early January, warm wind pouring down the slopes so fast the snow seemed to sag under it. Levi hated the look of the creek at once. "Too fast," he muttered. Grounds still locked underneath. Ada spent the day moving flour sacks high, dragging more wood close to the stove, and carrying Ruth's blankets from the loft edge to the wall. Fear, she had learned, goes down easier when your hands are busy. Levi rode out toward the north fence at dusk despite Ada's protests, saying he only meant to check the lower posts before dark. An hour later the dog began barking at the spring, not warning but alarm. Ada opened the door and heard the roar before she saw it. Water. Too much of it and in the wrong place. She ran to the rise above the shed and saw the upper sluice shattered, hacked through clean, sending meltwater and broken ice slamming down the cut toward the stock pen and cabin wall. "Ruth!" she shouted. The child appeared instantly. "To the rock shelf. Now." Ruth obeyed. Ada ran downhill through brown freezing water to the mule's hitch, cut the swollen knot free with her father's shears, then waded to the pen and pulled a trapped kid goat from under the splintered gate just as Levi came crashing back into the yard on horseback, coat dark with spray, eyes gone cold as iron. "The gate didn't fail," he shouted. "It was chopped. There was no time for outrage. Only action. Levi thrust the goat at the rock shelf, yelled for papers and coin, and plunged toward the half-collapsing shed. Ada raced into the cabin, snatched the cash box from under the bed, the marriage paper from the nail, Ruth's primer from the bench, and the little bag of savings from the flour crock. Then the old cedar chest under the window caught her eye. It was swollen from damp and nearly hidden by a folded quilt. Some instinct made her drag it clear. The lid burst open when it hit the floorboards, spilling a blue shawl, baby linens, and under them a roll of oilskin bound with waxed cord. Water slapped the threshold. Levi shouted from outside. Ada grabbed the oilskin and ran. Together they made the rock shelf with Ruth and the dog just before the largest surge hit the porch posts and snapped one clean through. The whole roofline dipped. Then came the log, a stripped length of pine turning in the current like a spear. Ada saw where it was going a second before Levi did. Levi! He turned as the log struck the foundation and the flood took his feet out from under him. He vanished into brown water and broken rail. Ada went after him without time to think. She found the back of his coat by blind luck and stubbornness, planted both boots, and hauled with every muscle she had the way her father taught her to pull hard-strung fence wire. Steady, no wasted jerk, let strain do the labor. Levi broke the surface, coughing river water and fury. Between them they clawed back to the shelf, Levi's left leg folding wrong when he tried to rise. Above the wreck of the yard, while the warm wind screamed in the trees and Ruth cried into the dog's neck, Ada understood that Pritchard had not meant to scare them. He had meant to wash them off the mountain. They spent the night under a tarp and blankets on the rock shelf while the flood gnawed at the yard below. The house groaned but held. Levi drifted in and out, pale and wet, one hand clamped around the oilskin bundle whenever pain let him move. Near dawn he opened his eyes and rasped, "Open it!" Ada unwound the cord with numb fingers. Inside were 2 survey sheets, a county receipt, and a letter in her father's hand addressed to Levi Calder. If you are reading this, Thomas Rowan had written in the hard, slanted script, illness gave him near the end. Then I have either died before setting matters right or lost my nerve longer than a man should. Hester has drawn too near Calhoun Pritchard, and he's after Martha's Meadow because the creek line joins your spring if ever the parcels are surveyed true. Ada knows more of maps than most men in that valley will credit, but she does not yet know how greedy people get when water runs beneath land. Keep these until she can use them, and if there comes a day when her own house no longer acts in her interest, lend her yours if you can. Ada read the words twice. The compass, the hidden papers, Levi's porch. Her father had seen danger coming and chosen a refuge before he died. Not perfectly, not in time, but he had tried to lay a line toward her future even as fever dragged him from it. Ruth whispered, "Is Pa going to die too?" Ada folded the letter against her chest and answered with a certainty she did not fully feel until she spoke it. "No, not while I'm holding on." Mrs. Sutter reached them by noon with 2 farm boys, a sled, and enough blankets to shame an army. The widow took one look at the yard, one at Levi's leg, and swore with a precision that would have impressed Ada's father. They hauled Levi down to Mrs. Sutter's place because her house was wider, lower, and easier for the doctor to reach. The climb nearly finished what the flood had started, but by dark Levi's leg was splinted, his hand rewrapped, and Ruth asleep with the dog on a pallet in the corner. Mrs. Sutter snored behind the wall with theatrical loudness, which was her way of granting privacy. Ada sat by Levi's bed with the lamp turned low and her father's letter open in her lap. When Levi woke and saw it, shame crossed his face before pain did. "You knew," Ada said. He stared at the ceiling boards before answering. "I knew your father feared Pritchard. I knew he wanted your meadow measured true. I did not know Hester would move so fast after he died. By then Anna was buried, Ruth was fevered, and I was a poor excuse for useful. I rode down once and saw the way you looked through me, like I was one more grown person come to claim something. I thought forcing help would only humiliate you." He turned his head then and looked straight at her. "What I didn't say was that I should have tried again." Ada could have cut him then with all the sharpened hurt she carried. Instead she found herself looking at the bandaged hand, the splinted leg, the stubborn man who had nearly drowned because richer people wanted straighter access to summer profit, and pity tangled with anger until neither stayed pure. My father used to say leather tears where strain sits longest, she murmured. Levi waited. Ada folded the letter, set it down, and met his eyes. You don't mend a life by pretending it never tore. The room went quiet around the sentence. Levi breathed once, carefully. I loved my wife, he said. I buried her where I can see the hill from the north fence. I thought grief had shut every good door after that. Then you walked onto my porch with your hands burned from saving a wagon that wasn't worth you. And every day since I have tried not to mistake gratitude for something larger. He swallowed. I failed. It's larger. Tears came into Ada's eyes before she could stop them. I don't know what to do with being wanted kindly, she admitted. Levi's mouth moved, just barely. Neither do I. It was the gentlest honesty she had ever heard. He asked her to take his coat from the peg. In the inside pocket lay the brass compass. Ada handed it to him. He closed her fingers over it instead. Tom meant it for your hand when the time came. Use it in town. Use it on me if I ever forget what choice means. Ada laughed through tears, and the sound woke Ruth, who raised herself on one elbow and stared at them in outrage. Are you both crying? She asked. From the next room, Mrs. Sutter called, without opening her door. Only the sensible ones, child. It broke the heaviness just enough for everyone to breathe again. If you have ever waited a long, hard season to hear gentleness where you expected harm, then you know why moments like that stay with people. And if you come here for stories that leave some warmth in your chest instead of taking it away, then stay with me. Leave a like, subscribe, and keep walking these roads with us. Morning brought purpose. The hearing on the Meadow objection was 2 days away. Levi could barely stand. Pritchard would count on pain, distance, and shame to finish what the flood had not. Ada, dressed in her plain dark skirt, pinned up her hair, tucked the survey's receipt and letter inside her coat, and drove to town in Levi's wagon with Ruth beside her and Mrs. Sutter armed like an old cavalry unit with facts, bread, and indignation. Levi came too, against advice, because there are some battles a man ought to witness even if he cannot wage them on his feet. The courthouse smelled of coal smoke, ink, and wet wool. Pritchard stood by the window smooth as ever, though mud stained one boot from a hasty attempt at respectability. Hester wore black and injured virtue. Mallory called the matter of Martha Rowan's upper meadow. Pritchard spoke first, offering the room his polished version. A girl honorably settled into marriage, an unmanaged tract in danger of neglect, a practical consolidation that would benefit trade and road access. He called it efficiency. He called it common sense. Hester dabbed at one eye. Ada had a sudden clear thought that some people rely on other folks' weariness more than they rely on law. When her turn came, Ada laid the surveys flat on the table and anchored them with the brass compass. She did not hurry. She explained that her father had measured the line showing the Upper Meadows Creek and easement ran continuous with Levi Calder's spring parcel through the lodgepole stand east of Bitter Run. She placed the sealed county receipt beside the maps and showed that the filing had been begun properly before Thomas Rowan's death, delayed by illness rather than neglect. She stated, in a level voice that made older men lean in whether they wanted to or not, that petition for abandonment had been filed only after her guardian misrepresented her residence and before notice had been lawfully served. Pritchard tried to smile. A girl's reading of old maps does not outweigh present necessity. Ada put one finger on the survey line. Then present greed ought not dress itself as necessity. A murmur moved through the room. Hester snapped that a dead man's fears proved nothing. Ada could have exposed every meanness Hester had ever hidden under housekeeping and piety. She could have humiliated her publicly and enjoyed it. Instead, she chose restraint, because truth needed weight, not vengeance. My father's fear proves only that he saw this attempt coming, she said. The proof sits in the altered timeline, the moved stakes, and the chopped sluice above Levi Calder's spring. That was the moment the room tipped. Mrs. Sutter rose from the back and said she had seen Pritchard's hired hand, Ned Fuller, ride the line before the flood with another man in a red scarf. The blacksmith testified that Fuller brought him a split sluice blade to sharpen 3 days before the Chinook. One farm boy said he saw the same red scarf at Mrs. Sutter's gate after the flood on a messenger asking how much damage the Calders had taken. Piece by piece, not in drama but in patient accumulation, truth gathered heft. Pritchard blustered, reasoned, and then sneered. All three wore poorly on him. Mallory conferred with the commissioner. When he turned back, the room went still enough to hear sleet tapping once at the window. The petition of abandonment is denied, he said. The Rowan meadow remains protected under pending final survey and will be filed in conjunction with the Calder Spring easement. Any cut road or interference with watercourse before completion constitutes trespass. The matter of tampering with survey stakes and sluice structure is referred for civil penalty. No one cheered. This was not a valley built for cheering. But shoulders lowered. Faces changed. A fact had replaced an assumption, and when that happens in a small place, the weather of every conversation shifts. Outside, under a winter sky gone hard and blue, Levi came slowly down the courthouse steps with his hand on the rail and Ruth at his side. Ada met him halfway. "Well?" he asked, though his eyes already knew. "Well," she said, and for the first time since Hester's wagon stopped on the mountain she smiled without first checking whether smiling was safe. "It seems the place is ours to save." Ruth flung herself at Ada's waist. Levi stopped close enough that the back of his knuckles brushed Ada's sleeve. Hester emerged behind them, drawn and brittle. For 1 second Ada thought she might ask forgiveness. Instead she said, "I did what I had to do." Ada looked at her, at the woman who had measured people only by use, and answered with calm that cost more than cruelty would have. "No. You did what was easiest to you." Mrs. Sutter heard it, hid a smile in her scarf, and said nothing. Restraint, Ada realized then, does not always feel gentle in the hand that chooses it. Sometimes it feels like putting down a rifle you know you could fire straight. Spring came late, but it came. The cabin wall was rebuilt on stone instead of guesswork. The stock shed got a better footing. Ada rode the line with the surveyor in April and held the chain herself while Ruth counted stakes and Levi called distances from horseback. The meadow proved rich, the joined water rights held, and the lower spring ran clean all summer. Pritchard paid his fine through tight teeth and sold 2 lesser parcels before July. Men still greeted him in town. Power rarely vanishes because it deserves to, but it no longer entered every room first. Hester kept her boarding house and lost, little by little, the habit of saying Ada's name like an unpaid bill. In May, Levi drove Ada to town with Ruth between them and the dog sulking under the seat because no one had invited him properly. They went first to Mallory's office and had the old marriage paper struck from record. Then they crossed to the little church with white clapboard sides and opened the front door together. The preacher asked Ada her choice so plainly that she loved him for it. This time, when she said yes, it sounded nothing like surrender. It sounded like a line drawn true. Seasons worked on them gently after that. Ruth's braids grew longer and neater under Ada's hands. Some evenings Levi planed cedar on the porch while Ada read aloud and the smell of fresh wood moved through the dusk. Some mornings Ada woke first and watched peace rest on his face like something learned late and guarded well. The folded cradle by the wall stood empty for a long while, no longer a wound and not yet a promise, until one spring it was needed again. Years later, on an evening washed gold clear to the far ridge, Ruth came racing down from the meadow with Lupin in both fists and a colt trotting foolishly behind her, while Levi lifted their baby son from a porch blanket and pointed him toward the swallows skimming low over the yard. Ada stood in the doorway with flour on her wrists, her father's compass warm against her breast, and understood at last what no paper had ever been able to grant or steal. Home is the place that learns your name and keeps saying it kindly, while the evening light lay soft across the porch boards and the whole mountain held them there. Next time, I'll tell you about the widow who found a stranger half frozen in her sheep barn with a sheriff's bullet in his shoulder and a wedding ring in his pocket that belonged to her dead husband. Until then, be gentle with your heart, and I'll meet you on the next trail.